Season 4 of The Crown aired in November of last year, 2020, and instantly received plenty of commentary. The Crown is a Netflix dramatisation following the lives of the royal family, in particular Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, and Princess Margaret. With this, it is an intimate portrayal of the monarchy within British history in the second half of the 20th century. It was originally based on the award-winning play The Audience by the creator of the show, Peter Morgan, which traces the same history through the Prime Minister's audiences with the Queen. Unusually, the series changes casts every second series to represent a passing of time. With this, the series started in 2016 with Claire Foy, Matt Smith, and Vanessa Kirby. And in season 4, these characters are being played by Olivia Colman, Tobias Menzies, and Helena Bowman Carter, respectively. This last season was a vast success, with 29 million people tuning in to watch the new series in the week after it was released on the 15th of November. And with this presentation of the 1980s, The Crown is turning closer and closer towards home, towards the present. In particular, it was an especially poignant and perhaps more controversial series because two iconic people from our recent past were immortalised on screen, Princess Diana and Margret Thatcher. Viewers were thus thrust into the relationship between Princess Diana, played by Emma Corrin, and Prince Charles, Josh O'Connor, whilst revelling in the conversations between Thatcher, who's played by Gillian Anderson, and the Crown. All of this led to the British Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, publicly claiming that he would write to Netflix to request that a health warning be added to the beginning of each episode, as a warning to viewers that it is fiction rather than fact. Netflix retorted that it had no plans to do so. Today, then, our Roundtable will look into this discussion further, exploring drama versus reality, the audience, and the role of the historian in period dramas through this case study, with our central question being, should The Crown include a fictional warning? And I am joined for this roundtable by the lovely Laura, Mike, Jack, and Sophie. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
So I thought maybe we should start by giving our gut reactions to that main question, and we'll see whether anyone changes their mind as we go throughout the conversation. So Laura, do you have a one-sentence answer to should The Crown include a fictional warning?
I would be quite hesitant to suggest such, because I think it undermines what it is as a drama, historical drama, which I'm sure we'll discuss what that entails. And also, it's not the only drama that is covering people who are still alive, etc. So I think it's being singled out, and I wouldn't say that is fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say that I can't see the harm in doing it. So I wouldn't see why we wouldn't do it, because I do think there is an odd blind faith around The Crown, which is something that I think does differentiate it slightly within the period drama bubble, which I guess we'll talk about a little as well. But I agree, it's not a should, it's a why wouldn't we? What do you think, Mike?
I guess my brief one-sentence answer is no, it doesn't need a health warning, it doesn't need a disclaimer. In the Simon Jenkins piece in The Guardian, which seems to have been a fairly central point of the debate around this, he caps it off by saying all it needs is an F for fiction in a corner somewhere. Fine, I guess. In the same way that The Onion or the Daily Mash gets a satire label on social media, if it puts people's mind at rest, fine. Add the fictitious warning. I think The Crown is such a stylized drama that the idea of anyone mistaking it for fact is, it's something I'm uncomfortable with. I think if we want to talk about why The Crown has been singled out, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to mine in there as well. But yeah, one sentence answer, no, it doesn't need one.
Jack?
Yeah, no, I agree with Mike entirely. And I think at the heart of the entire debate is a kind of an unfair characterization of the British public and of viewers in general. I think that viewers of particularly this kind of drama deserve much more credit than they're given often. And there are assumptions that people will just take whatever they see as it is. And I don't think that's the case. And I think that the bigger thing that shows like The Crown can do is actually foster a greater interest in these kinds of histories. And I'm sure that it's no coincidence that when I checked this morning, that the trending page on Netflix had 3 Princess Diana documentaries on it.
Yeah.
I'd not seen that before. And I think that what is much more likely is that people who see The Crown and become deeply invested in it are more likely to then go and find out the history for themselves and look at other sources. And I think that a fiction warning, if we can call it a warning, would almost distract from that. I think. I think that's where I stand at the minute. That might change.
We'll see by the end.
Yeah.
What about you, Sophie?
Well, my initial reaction was kind of the same as you, Holly. I thought there's no harm in adding a fictional warning when I first heard of it. But I think The Crown is kind of a victim of its own success in this way because, for example, there's so many other period dramas and we don't think, do these need a fiction warning? Like, we don't apply the same standards. But I think that's because The Crown has become so successful that we feel like the more people watch it, that this actually should be pointed out that this is not fictional. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, well, we definitely have a range of different points to get stuck into. I think we should start with the Simon Jenkins article that you brought up, Mike, which essentially says that The Crown's fake history is as corrosive as fake news. Now, I have enough notes on this I got very angry at him. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But I think there's plenty of things that we can discuss about what he says that link to what we've all just talked about. And one of the first things that he talks about is the fact that The Crown is derogatory towards living or recently dead individuals. So that makes me think of 2 things. Firstly, does that mean we just have to treat The Crown as good PR for the royal family as the only way to get it out of this fictional warning mire that it's currently in? And do we have different responsibilities when we are telling stories that are events in living memory or people who are still alive? So what do people think to that derogatory terminology that he uses?
Well, in Sir Simon Jenkins's piece,
is he a sir?
He is. I found this out on Wikipedia afterwards. I was like, oh, do you possibly have some investment in like maintaining the integrity of the establishment here, Simon? I'm not sure. I, like you, got a bit outraged by he lists a few of specifics things in there, like where history has been meddled with, and I suppose they kind of range from things like the Queen dressing in the wrong way for Trooping the Colour, which isn't something I have any investment in at all, to Diana throwing a tantrum in the Australia episode. And I think when I was looking at all of those, the ones that weren't, just straight up, I suppose, factual inaccuracies about royal protocol or something, is that all of the things that commented on, say, the character of those living or recently dead people, is that I suppose it only kind of served to humanise them, but a little bit more. So whilst we, there needs to be some recognition of making sure that we're not literally slandering anyone in a criminal sense, like implying that I think at the end of the piece he says, "Oh, what are they going to do in next season?" Like imply that the royal family had Diana killed. Which, while we were watching the show, I did say to my girlfriend, "Oh, I hope they do that next season. I hope they just go all out and just imply that Philip had Diana killed."
Especially with the sorry to interrupt, but the last
No.
scene where Prince Philip is in her bedroom, which is quite shocking. And I think if you've listened to the Jenny Bond Guardian, she said, you know, she was quite complimentary of most of it, but sometimes with the characters, especially because Diana is dead, and so, you know, it's harder to see how her character is to people who are watching it because we didn't grow up with her. That's quite inflammatory, and quite on the line. But so I think when you're talking about people's characters and they are dead, or, you know, it's recent living memory, there is always that push and pull. You can't take too many liberties, I would say. But I think that's the only bit where it does sort of go off.
There's another section where is the episode where they're looking into the mothering types of the Queen and Margaret Thatcher, and Prince Andrew gets pulled up quite a lot in that one.
I was hoping to talk about Prince Andrew.
Oh gosh.
And
opening
kind of, well, just mainly she says something like he's going to go down the wrong path or something like that if something doesn't happen. And I found some of those moments where it was too beneficial of hindsight, alleged hindsight, that I found the writing annoying. But I actually don't think in general that, like, because Jenkins says that it's scripted by Diana's biggest supporters, and I don't think Diana comes across terribly well, and I think she just comes off a bit better than Charles does.
For me,
what a high bar to clear.
For me, the character that came off the best was, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Queen herself. And I would argue that the biggest case of sort of misinformation that I saw, particularly season 4, was the Michael Fagan episode, The Intruder, where it's presented that he comes into her bedroom, obviously, as it happens, but then about a quarter or so of that episode is devoted to something that both Fagan and Buckingham Palace say didn't happen, which is that, you know, they have this incredibly long conversation where the Queen is incredibly gracious and very humble, and, you know, all of this stuff, which is you know, the express purpose of that is to, like we said earlier, to humanize the Queen and to present a particular image of Queen Elizabeth. And I think it's interesting, obviously, that these aren't the things that are pulled up for misinformation, that aren't talked about in these articles. And it's frustrating for me, because I think that with the Simon Jenkins article in particular, there are a couple of things, there are quite a few things that he says that I agree with in principle when they are not applied to the Crown. So where he talks about, you know, fake history being corrosive, I agree. I mean, we've seen it in the last few days in the Capitol. You know, we've seen Americans parade, and that is built on fake history. But to suggest that what's happening in the Crown is anywhere near as corrosive as fake news, I think is it's a challenge.
And I would also question that people who are alive, or events that were in living memory, we have more capacity to have a level of, like, discussion after an episode, because people have their own experiences, and we can have, like, oral histories around those moments that we don't necessarily get, say, if we're looking at something in the Viking period, at which, you know, Vikings being an apt example of, like, well, are we going or not?
And
I mean, one of the things, go ahead. One of the things I wrote down is a bit what Jack said earlier about it's quite distrusting to the audience, you know, to see it as this pure propaganda, because no one, I think, would watch that and just, you might, you know, obviously, and take it all, because you've got Google, you've got lots of things. Like we say, it's this whole thing with the whole Diana, like, people want to know more, and I think people just don't take everything in. You've got to find it out for yourself. And I think that's one of the things I just because like we said, no one comes off particularly well anyway. So to think it's all propaganda for Diana, I think is quite a jump. And playing on the memory of Diana.
I was just going to say, I think that's what Simon Jenkins ignores as well. He sort of suggests that this is a really negative portrayal of the royal family, whereas actually in this series and in other series, there's been a lot of more favourable moments towards them. It's not all just like, now Diana's come in and we're going to show them all as, you know, really mean. Like with Margaret and Peter Townsend, that was quite... I think a lot of people obviously thought the Queen looked bad in that position too. So it's not all about that. I don't think this series is any different from any other series of The Crown.
No, I agree. And I think maybe the difference might be the emotion that still surrounds Diana.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think
it's... Sorry, go on.
Just because she's such a popular figure, I think a lot of people watch it automatically sort of maybe on her side. And I think Diana is sort of the opening of the royal family for us. Like, and the same with Margaret Thatcher. If we were in their position, like, we'd be the ones not knowing the games they were playing, not knowing like what to wear to the certain films or whatever. So I think we enter already maybe having a bit of a bias, but that's just because of, for the rest of the series, it's been so like the royal family have been so removed from us as the viewer.
I think there is definitely an element of you bring into this your own perception, your own pre-existing schemas and perceptions of all this stuff. Like Jack mentioned the Michael Fagan episode, which you know, I knew nothing. I didn't know anything about it going in, but I do remember being told about that by my dad. So like, let's see, that happened in the mid '80s. So it was relatively like recent history when I was being told about it. And it's so funny because I remember being told that it pretty much happened as it did in the show, that he walked into the bedroom and they had a nice chat for a little while and everyone stayed calm, and then eventually he was sort of led away by a nice policeman. And I found it really interesting that the show actually kind of reflected that, I suppose, memorialized way I knew. Sorry, I'm rambling here. It reflected that memory rather than the way that it actually occurred. Yeah.
No, and I completely agree with that. And I think that part of The Crown's power is that it adds context to these key moments that we all know about, like about breaking into Buckingham Palace, like the really famous scene where it's Diana and Charles's engagement announcement, and he says the famous line, "Whatever being in love means."
Yes.
Yeah. Like, we all want to know the context to that line. We're all so intrigued by that. So I think by giving The Crown its level of authenticity, by linking it to these key moments that we all know and want that context to, I think that changes how we see it, because we're desperate for it to be a more realistic than it is portrayal of what led up to things like those moments.
I think that's definitely something that's like characterized the entire run of the series, particularly because it's about the Queen, whose entire public image is based around her being a relatively isolated figure who does not give away how she feels about any particular politician or social movement or anything really. The whole point of her existence, this is something that The Crown belabors many times over its episode, is we are not here to have an opinion, and yet of course we're human beings who do. And that's where one of the really key tensions of it, it's what makes the show really fascinating and makes trying to fill in those gaps really crucial.
Especially with the Queen's relationship with Margaret Thatcher, which is so integral to this fourth series. And when there's suggestion that it's leaked from the palace that the Queen is the one who disapproves.
Yeah.
We all want to know what the Queen thought of Margaret Thatcher, but we'll never know. And that does play on what we want, but so does every other historical drama, because like, for example, you just only have to think about King Henry and Queen Anne Boleyn, the amount of times you'll question that, and it will be questioned in dramas, be on and on and on. Is there any problem with that in a way? I don't know.
I think that this is why the debate about whether it matters that they're alive or not is interesting, because one thing you can say for talking about these issues when the Queen is still alive is that the monarchy still has a kind of media apparatus that they can use to reply to the show itself, and older monarchs, other people don't have that opportunity, let's say, which I think is an interesting thing. And the second interesting thing I think really is that the royal family is in a position to what's the word, go against these claims, to speak back against it, whereas a lot of other lesser well-known figures don't have that chance. So I think that it's an interesting position whereby the crown is in the monarchy. The talks about the discussion about the legitimacy of the history in the show are amplified because of the interest, and at the same time, the interest in the royal family, but at the same time, that interest in the royal family allows them to contradict the show. It allows them a right of reply. And I think that it's frustrating when journalists talk about the royal family compared to, say, me or you, when we simply don't have the chance to reply to these things. It's when they say, imagine if this was you. Well, we can't, because if it was us and somebody was portraying me in a film in a particular way that I didn't like, what could I do? There's nothing that I can do. So
yeah, I think that links significantly to the idea of who has ownership over the narrative when it comes to the royal family, which is a big question. I'm not even sure I know. They're public figures in an entirely different way to celebrities are. Separating it out from that, they are the head of our state, and do we therefore have a level of ownership in their stories, especially because they can't be Elton John and go make a film about their lives, which is heavily penned by his own values and what he wants to be told. So
I think it cuts to the heart of what everybody thinks about the monarchy, really, and that and I'll leave it there.
Oh, please, let's go further than that.
I mean, let's go down that rabbit hole, Jack.
I really, I suppose, like the presentation of Charles in season, which I'm sure is something we could definitely really get into, because I think precisely because of that one, I suppose does that sort of warping of history and drama and memory, in that, what you were saying, Jack, about it being sort of everyone's perception of what it is. It absolutely is explicitly in the case of Charles, who I don't know terribly much about the man, but they mention in the show that he's built Highgrove as a sort of grotesque monument to his own vanity, which is precisely what my perception is of that entire, I suppose, class of people has historically done throughout history. He's the one who behaves the most like a traditional king in that regard, and I think that's a
I think that
interesting.
Prince Charles is really interesting, because Jenny Bond said that was one portrayal she really did not like, and she thought she knows Prince Charles very well. She thought that was quite unfair, and on the flip side, he is the future king. Why? Because, like we said, no one comes off that good, that well, but he definitely comes off the worst. And she said it's nothing like how he is, and there's this constant digs into his life with Diana, but also, like we were talking about with the hindsight with Camilla, which I'm not sure is entirely fair, but then
I think the opposite to this, though, is that could we imagine what this show would be like if there weren't these character dramas? My God, would it be boring?
It was so dull.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's drama. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And with Charles, I think he was extremely happy with the third series, because when he was invested as the Prince of Wales, that episode was like very positive towards Prince Charles. And I think perhaps part of this conversation is that it was a shock that the person who I think probably comes away best from that love triangle in the show is Camilla, because she seems to be the one who's the most rational and sensible and calm about the situation. And so I think maybe, like, I really enjoyed that horrible tabloid article that Alan Titchmarsh had stopped watching because because his friend was Prince Charles, and Prince Charles was being lambasted by this trolling on a Hollywood budget.
I think because this is a European project.
Yeah, I'll explain. Alan Titchmarsh is a famous gardener. Quite big.
Only in Britain would he be a major cultural force, you know.
And
I love him.
Yeah, but that's the my point is that shows the level to which we are kind of talking about this, where everyone is getting involved. And lovely Alan Titchmarsh, who is a normally very quiet, sweet gardener, passive man, came out and said he wasn't going to watch the show anymore because it was unfair to Charles. But he loved the show, but he couldn't watch it anymore. And I thought, well, surely that means, therefore, the histories that people are wanting to be told are only positive towards Charles. And the problem that the Crown's come into this series that's caused so much debate has been that the history has not been reported in his favour. I think so too.
Sorry. A lot of, when I was looking at this, a lot of articles that were, saying the Crown had done a bad portrayal were Charles's friends or people who'd worked in the palace before. But like, it is a drama, and it's not always going to be to how you know someone like intimately, because obviously the people who wrote the Crown didn't have knowledge of Charles or any of the royal family personally. And if that was the case anyway, and they'd like spoken to members of the royal family or people who worked in the household, then would it not just be people complaining that it's too much of like a royalist propaganda anyway? So I don't know, it's not going to be completely accurate to how Charles's friends know him, because this is Charles as a public figure, and then they've just dived into like his personal life, and I think maybe that's where there's some contention.
I think as well, just to kind of build on that, a problem with dramas of this kind that they come up against is that it's very difficult to condense some 30 years of life into a 10-hour miniseries. And I think what happens here is that the destination that they want to get to with the characters, let's say, the destination being Charles's interesting, let's say, relationship, that triangle between him, Camilla, and Diana, getting to there is the important thing. That is what the viewer will take away. How they get there is determined not just by what actually happens, but by the constraints of television. The fact that, to show these things developing, it's very difficult to do in an hour's time. And so it might be best to tell a few fibs here and there to get to the same place, and to get to that place more effectively, if that sort of makes a bit of sense.
I do agree, because I think you've got to develop the characters, and Diana, there was a lot of time focused on her mental illnesses, her struggle with bulimia, and I think that amount of time put on it was important, because you've got to reach why their marriage, why she was so, why all the terrible things happen. And yes, maybe the time in the Australia episode when she's fit, maybe they weren't fair, but at the end of the day, it's characters that make a show. And I completely agree with Jack, you've got to reach that end point, and you will sacrifice how things went wrong, because you could write a whole book about, you know, the examples of what went wrong in a marriage, but you've only got an hour.
Exactly. And this is what people will remember. They will remember the ones that aren't as deeply invested will remember the bigger picture stuff, which, as far as I understand, is largely accurate. The ones that are interested in the minutiae will go and find that out for themselves. And I think that the concerns are about this kind of mythical group of people who will remember all of these tiny little details, but will just take what the show says as fact and won't then go into, you know, do their own looking about or compare to other media sources. But I think that group of people is remarkably small compared to, you know, like I said, those who will just remember the bigger picture stuff. Those were in 2 years will probably have forgotten it all anyway. And those that are really invested in will go and find out things for themselves. And I think that's, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry, but I think you're completely right, because most people watch it because it's a good drama, not necessarily for the history, which I think the whole idea is what's kind of forgotten in the Jenkins argument. It's a drama. People are watching it because it's good television.
Yeah,
not
and it's
everyone is invested in the truth.
And it's constructed as a television program, which has its own specific constraints. Just as Jenkins will have had to have written to specific constraints, maybe a word limit in his writing, just as we all have to write to specific constraints. You create, everything you create goes to specific set rules, and as does a period drama, and you kind of have to accept that there has to be that character arc, there has to be the story arc. Every episode, like, The Crown is very specific in how it kind of likes to do some standalone episodes, like the break into Buckingham Palace or the Aberfan episode, which was in the series before. And I just think you have to understand the context in which it is a physical show, as well as just the context of the history as well.
And it brings me back to something that I mentioned a bit earlier about what's been happening in America recently, which is that I think, you know, a historian should never do this. Who am I to decide what is important history? But I think that the most, let's say, impactful history, the stuff that I think really matters, isn't the personal relationships between royal members. It's everything that's happening around that. It's the IRA. It's the Falklands War. It's apartheid later on in that particular season, and, you know, the political endeavours surrounding that. I think that's what really matters. And what frustrates me about these articles is that it imagines that portraying royal members in a way that is particularly favourable is more important than I think it actually is. And I think that the real successes for me of The Crown are when the performances are incredible. Let's not forget that, of course. But I think that what I think it really succeeds at doing is showing those particular time periods in a visceral, very kind of fleshed out way.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the history for me. And
I would agree, because even though we've mentioned the Michael Fagan episode as, you know, what he was with the Queen, but I think, you know, when he was describing, you know, being unemployed and like the hardship, and then comparing that to Margaret Thatcher, that was brilliant. And that was what really I enjoyed in the episode, because obviously, you know, I can ask my dad about what it was like, but and I think that was spot on and really engaging.
I think one of the powers of period dramas, which we can't deny, is that it immerses you into a world that is hard to bring to life in other ways. And being able to have a much more effective engagement with these bigger questions and issues like you mentioned, Jack, is a really powerful thing that The Crown enables us to do.
Well, I think an example of this is, has anybody seen Marco Polo on Netflix? Lasted for 2 seasons before getting cancelled because it was far too expensive. But one of the issues around that program is that, you know, it's entirely likely that Marco Polo wasn't as involved with the Mongolian sort of empire as he claimed to be in his own words, and he's portrayed as in the program, but he fulfills an important role in pairing a European traveller with an empire that is completely foreign to him, and that is the tension of the entire program. And these inventions, let's say, of Marco Polo being more important than he is, being more involved in events that he is, shows us an even bigger truth almost, which is you know, to present the sort of to present the Mongolian Empire in a particular way and allow us to compare it directly to something that is foreign. And that's where the show excels, I think. But it's on the back of something that, you know, might not be true. And yet its bigger purpose, I think, is really important. So that's something that I think historical drama can do really well.
Yeah, and I think The Crown is particularly effective in how it now, I'm not someone who believes in that we should be pursuing authenticity in dramas, because it's not a documentary. That's essentially what we're saying in general. Yep. But The Crown is very good at giving us settings and costume and casting that makes us feel like we are immersed in that world, and therefore through that level of authenticity, we are immersed into a storyline that we can then have discussions from. Now, say if they'd cast Charles as some blonde, blue-eyed 43-year-old, we'd all go, well, this is ridiculous. We're not learning any history here. And so I think there's like this balance between keeping people in the narrative, which is what's important, which was powerful, and also then people saying, well, it's not accurate enough.
Yeah, that being said, though, there is, I think, something to be said for that kind of narrative artifice as well. You're mentioning Charles there being, you know, if he looks completely different, then we'd struggle to take it seriously. Mm-hmm. I would say that Josh O'Connor, who plays him, is I looked this up. He's a couple of weeks younger than me, and
I know.
He's supposed to be playing a 42-year-old by the end of the season. But I think in a way that's kind of good, because that's one of those conversations that you have while you're watching it is is about how accurately or not they're able to capture that character. Like I had the experience of watching this entire season with my mother. So I did get the running commentary on exactly how accurate the history was. But
me too.
I did get to ask her, like, how, like, was the Thatcher impression? Well, how much, like, is it? Because watching it, I thought Anderson's doing a really good impression here, but it kind of comes across a bit of a caricature.
Yeah.
And my mother said, honestly, in real life, she came across as a caricature of herself.
Yeah.
It was, and I just think there's something really, really interesting about how the confusion of it being a television program, like Jack was saying, like, how do you squeeze in this amount of time into these episodes? And most of the discussions we were having while we were watching it is, what are they going to do in the next 8 episodes? And we listed the events, like, surely they're going to do a Hillsborough episode, like, surely that's going to happen at some point. We listed all of those things, most of which didn't really come to be, but engaging with it in that, like, how do you determine how to write history under these constraints is, I think, really fascinating.
And I think something really interesting there is that you mentioned people discussing, how accurate is this portrayal of this particular character? Now, if you look online, so many discussions are about this. They're talking about, well, how does Olivia Colman act as the Queen? How believable is that? How Gillian Anderson, etc. Now, what this suggests to me is that people are engaged with these questions. They are engaged with the accuracy already. You know, so much of the conversation is about it already. We don't need a fiction warning telling people this. They're doing it on their own. Audiences are intelligent. You know, one of the most
I'm sure if you looked at the Google trends of, you know, did this happen, you'd see a shot when it happens. And that is what good historical drama is, because there's this idea that it has to be authentic enough to draw people in, but you don't need a real event for them to feel like we said, you know, with the whole, like, social history thing. You just need to draw them in, and they can make their own conclusions as such, because The Crown does do that emotional connection quite well.
I think this does draw us into the question, though, of audience, because I think, as you said, Mike, with Thatcher, because, you know, I was born in 1995, I don't have reference points of Thatcher, and I also don't have reference points of Diana. So I was coming from a very different position than, say, my mum was when we were both watching it. And also, we're coming from a position of being British. So I don't know if perhaps you do need a fiction warning, considering age, which is a vast difference on what you know of these stories, and when it's going out to an international audience.
I think this is one of the problems that we've sort of had, in that for a lot of people, they already know, they don't need to be told this is a fictional drama, because they've had their own memories of what happened. So they know that it didn't really, well, it might not have really happened like that, or this conversation between two people, they have no way of knowing that this is what was actually said, so it's probably made up. But for people who, like, we're all quite young, we've not lived through that period, and international audiences who also might not know too much about it, or might not remember it ever being in the news, then this is our first time experiencing these events. And even though it's not a documentary, and we know it's a drama, we know it's not supposed to be like 100% accurate, it's our first introduction to some of it. So I think it's obviously, we should know not to assume this is a documentary, but also, having just been introduced to these topics, we do sort of form an opinion about them, and we have no other reference point to tell us, actually, no, this is how this happened. And I mean, I know you can obviously go off and do your own research, but I don't know how many of the Crown viewers would actually do that.
Well, I'd also be interested to know how many, particularly in this country, how many viewers of The Crown are watching it without any knowledge of the royals. And what I suspect, I mean, I've got no basis for this whatsoever, so feel free to shoot me down. But I would suggest that an interest in the royal family is what causes somebody to watch a programme like The Crown, and no interest in the royal family, I'd be surprised if people really watched it. I suppose a useful comparison for us would be, say there was a semi-fictional drama about the Spanish king, for example. And then let's say that once we've watched it, somebody tells us that some of it wasn't true. I wonder how much that would matter.
Yeah.
And I think this is the point, that so many of these so-called these infractions are so minor. And, you know, in principle, you know, it's very important that, like I've said, that history is not used for malicious purposes. But equally, I don't think this is. And I think that, you know, the infractions are very minor. And the only thing I think it impacts, potentially, is somebody's opinion of the royal family and of monarchy generally. Now, I would suggest, particularly at the minute, that the royal family have bigger concerns in that department than season 4 of The Crown. And I
would argue that Prince Andrew's 40-minute interview did way more damage than like 40 hours of The Crown would ever do.
Yeah, I don't think that it's corrosive in any state, because it's not saying, there's not enough to say that it's dangerous or, you know, fake history. So it's not inciting violence, you know, as we saw in America. It's really quite an emotional, but it's a drama. You walk away thinking it's not going to shock you in some way. I mean, it may, but it's not going to change your view of anything really, apart from thinking, oh, maybe, you know, poor Diana, or oh, she was a bit nasty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think we should choose our words very carefully here. Corrosive history, you know, we can talk
Too
about
strong.
We can talk about Holocaust denial as corrosive history. We can talk about depictions of the Confederacy as corrosive history. You could talk about fiction surrounding the British Empire as corrosive history. I don't think it's fair to call this corrosive history. I don't think you can possibly compare what happens in The Crown to these, you know, other things which are far more dangerous.
Exactly. One of Jenkins' problems was that in the show, Lord Mountbatten had been shown writing a letter.
Yeah.
A letter.
Which is fantastic.
It just drives the storyline. It drives the storyline. It needed to happen. We all knew when it opened the series with Lord Mountbatten, knowing the history of what happens to Lord Mountbatten, you knew what was going to happen to him, and you understood that drove the storyline.
It was much more corrosive to not mention Lord Mountbatten's, you know, issues with, you know, he was accused of, you know,
that IRA kind of just gets pushed over. The political reasoning kind of gets widely kind of moved away from very quickly. I mean, people were upset about the way that Charles was fishing when he got told. Like, that's what somebody complained about.
That was the wrong method of fishing.
Yeah, the wrong method of fishing.
But I think it shows
That's
that
what they
people
cared
always,
about.
people always look for these little things, but most of us will look for the overall picture with the audience, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because no one wants you to watch The Crown and write an essay about it. It's not what it's for.
Damn it.
Unless you're a public historian.
Unless you're a public historian.
Well, that makes me think about the question, whose role is it to explain that this is narrative? Is it Oliver Dowden's role to tell us that we should have a warning on the things, that the content we're consuming?
I think government interference is fanciful, to be honest. I completely would disagree with him. I would say they've got more to talk about. They're talking about, his role with culture, where you've got a lot more things to discuss rather than a historical drama, which is great to watch, great TV. I don't understand why, maybe it's offensive to them because they are the government, the Queen. The Queen is, this whole important thing to conservative ideology. But it doesn't really inform the government's position.
It shouldn't be too surprising to us that, like, the establishment, likes to prop up the establishment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think one of the Prince Charles. One of the articles I read quoted like a close friend of Prince Charles who described it as like very careful, seditious, like Republican propaganda, which I personally felt was overstating the point somewhat. Maybe giving Peter Morgan a little bit too much credit, but I don't know. I'm not surprised that that the culture secretary decides to chip in, and I guess I'm just mildly grateful that we have a culture secretary who's at least like vaguely in the know about what people are actually engaging with. At least kind of vaguely understands that these are kind of issues that we might talk about.
The issues he might want to engage with at the same time.
And I think in the context of current political discourse, just saying it is the important thing. It's the whole culture wars, isn't it? It's the act of saying something is what matters. It doesn't matter what his argument is. I don't think. I've noticed that, because I checked the sort of news websites, that there's 2 newspapers still talking about this, and the ones you would expect. Yeah. For most people, it's finished. Everyone will move on. There won't be a fiction warning, and then we'll move on to the next one and have all of the same arguments all over again.
Well, something happens to Diana in the next series, so I think that we might have a lot of emotional reaction to that happening.
On a side note, I was thoroughly expecting them to finish the Crown around that time, because that's where the movie The Queen, which is another Peter Morgan project, kicks off. And I always assumed that would be where that narrative ends, but no, we've sped through history. We're definitely, that's happening next.
So I'm under the impression, and this might be wrong, but I think he was commissioned for 6 series. Said he was only going to do 5 because he felt like there was only 5 series worth of history. Debatable in all of its words. But then realised when he was writing the 5th that there had to be a 6th as well.
What I really hope is that after the 6th season, it pivots to science fiction and we see the monarchy of the future. And it's all, the Queen with robotic legs wandering the wastelands of Europe. Why not?
Well, exactly. We could just
take his head in a jar or something.
Yeah, I mean, imagination wouldn't be as scorned upon if it was that kind of genre of television program, whereas historical imagination seems to be really what's caused the problem here.
Yeah, I think what is so central to what Oliver Dowden is saying is just that how important history is, that the fact that he can get involved, and that just proves that it's important to talk about these things. And I think the Crown's great at raising awareness of how recent history is understood in such different ways. I think that's something that is a real positive, and it only shows how important this subject is for him to be so angry or get so involved.
Yeah. And so do you think it's the role of historians to kind of go in and pick up the inaccuracies and say, well, this is what actually happened?
You've got to put food on the table somehow.
Well,
Yes.
it's true.
Simon Jacobs
for us.
Manchester Phil. Historians have got to make ends meet somehow, and if it means pointing out that you wouldn't wear that hat to the Trooping of the Colour, then so be it.
Very true.
You can't look at recent events and not think. Well, I mean, I could certainly think it'd be useful to have an historian's point of view on this, and I think that's something that's.
And
really
I think if Alan Titchmarsh is qualified to talk about it, so are we. As good as he is at digging holes and taking it to strange new places, I think it would be good. I mean, it'd be good for our future prospects if historians were involved a bit more. An interesting thing here actually is that, does anybody remember Versailles, the old BBC program?
I watch it.
Oh, it's very good.
So good.
It was excellent. And I think I'm remembering this right, so stop me if I'm wrong. But wasn't there like a sister show to that, which was historians talking about the series?
By Greg Jenner.
Greg Jenner, yeah. And it was really
something.
Yeah, it was really popular. There is an appetite for this stuff, and like I said earlier.
Yeah, this is one. I mean, I recently wrote an essay about the program Chernobyl, and you've got the Chernobyl podcast, and not everyone listens to it, but some people do, and it's really interesting. And you get to see the director's point of view as well as like the historian's kind of point of view, and that's just another way to add engagement.
Yeah,
and would these people? Sorry, just to say, would these people be watching it if it wasn't for the drama? If the drama wasn't so excellent, would they be going further? And I'm sure that I can speak for myself here, but we didn't all get into history by reading old textbooks. It was a lot of it was stuff that wasn't true. Because it's really
it was Greg Jenner with horrible histories. This all just centers back to Greg. Something I find so. Netflix do have a YouTube series called Beneath the Crown, where they talk about and every title is the true story of something that happened, like the true story behind the Australia trip, which I already have issues with. But it's presented by Anita Rani, so not a historian. And they merge archival footage with footage from the show when they are describing the real history, which I always find interesting because they are literally like sewing the two together. And I personally think it would benefit from having a bit more separation from the drama and just being more analytical towards what actually happened, or what we think actually happened, because at the end of the day we don't know the true story.
That's interesting. I didn't actually know of that series, but I think there's a potential that you can fall into a trap there of thinking the history is just visually what happened. The history is just a kind of a run of facts. It's a timeline that we all need to remember stuff from. Whereas, as we know, it's a lot deeper than that, and it's actually a lot more interesting than that. And when people talk about accuracy, it happens a lot whenever there's a First or Second World War film. The accuracy that they talk about, I say a lot of people talk about badges and troop movements and uniforms and everything. But I think it's more interesting to talk about sort of more meta narratives. Grander theories, grander ideas. And I think that's what historians can do. I just think that's much more interesting than, like I said, getting bogged down in the minutiae.
But I agree that the Versailles was particularly good showing on BBC with it straight after. Because one of the things I have a mild obsession with Gogglebox, which is a program where we watch people watch TV, watching The Crown, because I find it vastly interesting seeing what they're reacting to on Gogglebox, and a lot of it is like, oh, I don't like Charles as much now because he's just had this fight with Diana. And I think if Netflix put 10-minute episodes between the episodes where it explained it, that might, it would ruin the flow of the series, but it's equally, I think perhaps the issue is that you're dropping it in one go and people are consuming it in one go rather than consuming it per episode, and therefore you reflect upon the episode.
I think that represents a really interesting idea that we've just had to contend with Netflix is you get this information dump, and you're not looking forward, you're not thinking what's going to happen next. But that's just the state. We all want it. We all want to watch, you know, to spend a whole day watching Bridgerton.
We all do.
Yeah.
And I think something specific to the royal family here is that for most people, the crown represents such a small part of what makes them think the way they do about the royal family. You know, it's in Britain, it's difficult to escape them. We have the Queen on all of our money, for example. Yeah. You know, there's the Queen's speech every Christmas. It's very much part of our. It's woven into our culture, and I think people, particularly, you know, the culture secretary, for example, puts too much weight onto the crown. You know, it's television is such a small part of the way that we think the way we do about particular things, and it's just one show. You know, I mean, lots of people watch other dramas that will represent the Queen, even if it's not about her, even if it's just a small part of another show. I think people are giving the crown too much weight in that department, and that really we think the things that we do not because we watch one television program, but for lots of reasons. And I just think let people get on with that.
Well, on that note, I think we should probably decide if we now all agree whether the crown should come with a fictional warning or not. And I think because I started this thinking that it wouldn't do any harm, and I still agree it probably wouldn't do any harm. But yeah, I do agree that, especially with you, Jet, that we should take audiences as more intelligent than needing to be spoon-fed what isn't real, and the hope that they will go from the crown and learn more history in books and podcasts and university courses. Laura?
Yeah, I would say it's just not necessary. I think that you've got to enjoy it as a drama, historical drama, which you can, like you say, go and find more. But in the end, hold it to what it is. It's a TV drama. It's not changing the world. It's not saying it's going to change your view on the monarchy. That's not its purpose, and I don't think you should see it like that.
Yeah. Jack?
Yeah, and I think especially as historians, we should save the type of language that people have talked about the crown for things that really, really matter, you know, for Confederate history, for Holocaust denial. That's where our attention should be.
Yeah. What about you, Sophie?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think anything too big has come of this. I mean, I don't know if the royal family has particularly increased or decreased in popularity since The Crown, and I think the discussions have definitely died down, and it's not Netflix's #1 trending show anymore. I think we should be able to just appreciate it as a fiction without a warning.
Do you want to make the final statement, Mike?
Always.
Go on.
No, nothing. I haven't really changed position. I think this discussion has kind of hammered home to me that we just live in this age where there is such a glut of content. Yeah. And there is so much, aside from the main product, which is The Crown, there are so many part of the product of consuming that thing is in watching the YouTube videos afterwards. It's in reading the commentary. It's in talking to your family. It's part and parcel of how these things are designed and sold now. And the idea that just watching, say, The Crown is your sole the idea that would only be your sole interaction and engagement with that is okay, I suppose for some people it would be, but I also think most people wouldn't necessarily have a lasting impression of it afterwards. And also that if we want to compare it to the events of the last couple of days, I think the idea that a population's untethering itself from reality begins with something like these historical depictions being slightly inaccurate is so wildly off the mark that I don't think there's any danger in it. But by all means, stick a big F in the corner if you want to do that.
It makes you feel better.
Just for good measure.
Yeah.
For good measure, why not?
I think it's taught us that we have bigger fish to fry in 2020 and 2021, if anything else. I've really enjoyed this conversation, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.